So what exactly is this game? I know a lot of you may not have even heard of it. So Genigods Nezha, an upcoming single-player action RPG currently in development by Chinese studio Genigods Lab for both PlayStation 5 and PC, has a tentative launch window of 2028. Now, this game is heavily inspired by ancient Chinese creation myths and what developers refer to as Chinese Genesis mythology, rather than focusing on a single legend or novel. Players assume the role of the Spirit Pearl, the first life created by the goddess Nuwa from earth, water, and fire, who was ultimately reincarnated as the legendary figure Nezha. Unlike many mythology-inspired games that simply retell familiar stories, Genigods appears to place players directly inside these events, allowing them to participate in the creation myths themselves rather than merely observing them. The game promises large-scale battles against colossal gods and monsters while featuring fast-paced, highly cinematic action combat. One of its signature abilities allows players to awaken Nezha's famous three-headed, eight-armed form, a visual that immediately stood out in the reveal trailer. So please don't clown me too much for the pronunciation because I butchered it. I already know for a fact I did. I'm no Chinese mythology or historian, buff, or anything like that, so I don't know. So just forgive me and bear with me on that front. But however, when I saw the reveal trailer the very first time, I actually saw it a few months ago, I initially drew comparisons to Game Science's Black Myth Wukong. And they actually have another title themselves coming out called Black Myth Zhuang Kui. I don't know the release date for that one, but anyways, I digress. When I saw that, I immediately drew comparisons to those titles. And things such as the UI, sorta, not exactly the same, but sorta similar. The fighting styles, it kind of looks, how it just has that fluid, flow-like combat. It just reminded me of Black Myth Wukong and how the Monkey King fought. And just when I read the synopsis of it as well and did the research for the video, I'm like, okay, well, this is just exploring Chinese mythology. So just from that angle itself, I already drew the comparison to Black Myth Wukong. But it's nice to attack it from a different angle, so to speak, different ways to skin a cat. Whereas with Wukong, that's a prominent Chinese mythological figure, this seems to be someone who has a direct correlation or some sort of lineage towards the gods themselves, whereas Wukong wasn't a god. So it'll be nice to see that particular angle from this, and just more to learn as well, because I don't know anything about Chinese myth. Everything focuses more so on Greek or Norse. So it's nice to see when we get things that are based in other mythologies. I think the game already has a strong visual identity already. Clearly they already know what they want to do, and I think they already have a plan to outline themselves and diversify themselves from titles like Black Myth Wukong. I think it's one of the most impressive announcements that we saw when this was initially revealed, because everything else seems to want to focus on games like GTA, games like Wolverine, but I'm more so interested in things that people are not talking about to the same degree. And this is something I just kind of forgot about. I just had it in my mental storage, like, wait, hold on, I need to make a video on that Genigods game because that looks insane. So thus, this is where we are. I think Chinese mythology, it feels fresh compared to medieval fantasy settings like an Elden Ring, like a Souls game, and we don't get tired of those games. There's no Souls fatigue over here, but it's just nice to see something different and to see a mythology other than the most prominent ones explored. Now, in terms of the world and the story of Genigods, the game takes place after Pangu, the primordial creator god in Chinese mythology, falls into an eternal sleep. His absence causes the cosmos itself to begin collapsing. 10 suns scorch the earth, turning the world into a crimson wasteland, while endless wars between gods tear apart the heavens themselves. The celestial pillars holding reality together have collapsed, allowing monsters and horrors to emerge from the abyss below. Nuwa, the goddess of life and one of the most important deities in Chinese mythology, gifts the player the heart of the Spirit Pearl, a divine artifact that serves as both companion and source of power throughout the adventure. And from what I've been able to discern, the player's journey revolves around 3 primary objectives: repair the heavens using the legendary 5 colored stones, discover the truth behind Nezha's origins, and seal space-time rifts consuming the world from below. Early gameplay descriptions suggest a combat system emphasizing fluid movement, parries, counters, and reactive defensive mechanics inspired by the adaptability of water. So I would say this is very mythologically apocalyptic type of feeling going on here. So, you know, like in Norse mythology, how they have Ragnarok. This sounds like it's the Chinese equivalent to what Ragnarok is in Norse mythology, how it's the predetermined, foretold destruction of the Norse world and Norse mythos. This seems like this is something to the same degree. Maybe it's not, it doesn't have that foreshadowing aspect to it where it's something that was destined, because this seemed like this is something that was spontaneous because of that, of the primordial creator god being absent. This seems like something that just happened, or not just happened, but there was a causative aspect towards it. Whereas in Norse mythology, that's just something that's foretold, like, hey, Ragnarok is coming, you're all cooked. So I think that's where it both differentiates and is very similar to that mythology. And I also think that the Souls-like influence seems kind of obvious. I'm not sure if this is a Souls-like, but I think just the way the UI looks, just on the objectives themselves, how you can have multiple different things that you need to do, and let's say you fail one of these objectives, or you only accomplish one of them, maybe you accomplish none of them, well, that already instills in me the expectation like, hey, this game might have multiple endings. This might be something that's Souls-like in that regard. So I think this could become one of the largest depictions of Chinese creation mythology in gaming, because all we have right now, to my knowledge, and that I think is the most prevalent, is the Black Myth series. I can't wait till the new one comes out, Zhonghui. We don't know anything about that. But this here could rival that or even surpass it because of the scale of it and the scope. Whereas Black Myth Wukong focuses on Wukong, this focuses on an entirety of other different things, and it just draws all that stuff into one stirring pot. This is also something similar to the game like Godslayer. That's another thing that seems to be based in Asian mythology. I'm pretty sure it's Chinese culture, where they explore different aspects of the overall mythos. So it'll just be nice to see how this game, in comparison to both the Black Myth series and to Godslayer, how this sort of ties into that and how it differentiates itself from them. So who is the protagonist? For many Western audiences, Nezha is a relatively unknown figure, but in China, he is one of the country's most famous mythological heroes. Nezha originates primarily from the 16th century Chinese novel Investor of the Gods and centuries of earlier folklore. He is traditionally portrayed as a child deity and warrior god associated with rebellion, independence, and resistance against authority. According to the mythology, Nezha was born under supernatural circumstances and possessed immense divine power from birth. After accidentally causing conflict with the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea, Nezha sacrifices himself to save his family from divine punishment. He is later resurrected by his master using lotus roots and mystical powers, effectively becoming a reborn divine hero. Now, he famously wields the fire-tipped spear, the universe ring, the red armillary sash, and the wind fire wheels that allow him to fly. One of his most iconic forms grants him 3 heads and 6 arms, though Genigods expands this into a spectacular 3-headed, 8-armed combat form for gameplay purposes. In Chinese culture, Nezha often represents youthful defiance against destiny itself, earning him the reputation as China's ultimate mythological rebel. So if I had to sum him up, I guess he would be sort of a combination between Kratos, Naruto, and the Monkey King in Chinese mythology. I guess that'd be the best way to do it. And I think they had an excellent selection in terms of the character they chose for an action game. This is someone who was a rebel, someone who was born unnaturally strong. So that kind of reminds me of like OP protagonists that you'll see in anime, someone like a Sung from Solo Leveling, someone like Broly from Dragon Ball Z. But then something happens where he has to sacrifice himself, so that implies that, okay, maybe he had a decrease in those naturally God-given powers in Chinese mythology. And then in a way, this could also serve as a way for him to acquire that strength that he once had. And I think just the overall greater symbolism, especially with youthful audiences, is that he serves as that rebel against divine authority and against any sort of religious dogma or anything that they have going on in that culture, in that mythology that was present in these novels that he is based out of. So it'll be nice to see things from that angle. And as I said before, it's also nice to always just learn things. Like, people tend to just have a video game and they just play it for the gameplay, or they play it for some sort of alternative reason. But these things are art forms. They really are. People may view them as a waste of time, but that's not it at all. People put a lot of money, a lot of resources into these things. They come up with a lot of creative aspects and a lot of creative angles to attack a story from. They give us music, they give us references of their culture, of their religion. So these things are worth more than just the X amount of hours that you're going to put into it and then you never put the controller back up again. You never pick it back up again to play the game. Like, appreciate what you're playing. So for me particularly, it'd be nice to have this just so I can learn, because I had the same experience with Black Myth Wukong, who I knew nothing about. I just knew that Goku, my all-time favorite anime character, was based off of him. But aside from that, I didn't know anything about him. So it's nice to play that game so I could learn more, and it'll be the same experience when I play this. Now let's talk about why Chinese mythology games are exploding right now. For decades, Japanese mythology and Western fantasy dominated AAA gaming, while Chinese mythology remained largely unexplored internationally. That situation has changed dramatically over the past few years. The biggest example is Black Myth Wukong, which I've been alluding to the entire video, which sold over 10 million copies in just 3 days and eventually surpassed 25 million copies worldwide. The success of Wukong demonstrated that there is enormous global demand for stories rooted in Chinese folklore and mythology rather than traditional Western fantasy settings. Since then, publishers and developers have increasingly invested in premium single-player games based on Chinese legends, historical periods, and literary classics. China possesses thousands of years of mythology and folklore that remain largely untapped by the global games industry. Unlike many Western franchises that revisit the same mythological figures repeatedly, Chinese mythology offers international audiences entirely new gods, monsters, heroes, and cosmologies. We've had decades of Norse mythology. We've had decades of Greek mythology. So let's look at prominent series like God of War. God of War is amazing. God of War is the preeminent PlayStation title. I believe that wholeheartedly, but we've had it for a long time. We've had games that try to spin off of that for long periods of time. We've had games that explore Norse mythology and the Norse gods and mythos for long periods of time. And let's remove the game aspect from the overall context. Let's look at other mediums and other forms of media. Let's look at anime, let's look at animations, let's look at movies, titles like Clash of the Titans, titles like Gods of Egypt, titles like Thor in Marvel Cinematic Universe. These type of things, they explore these mythological characters in formats outside of gaming. So we're burning the candle at two different ends, and I'm not saying that is a bad thing, but we are, because you're experiencing it from the gaming perspective, but also from other forms of medium, such as books, Percy Jackson, such as movies, such as TV shows, all these other things. So essentially, if there's anything that would have a fatigue aspect to it, it would definitely be Greek and Norse mythology. But with Chinese mythology, it feels new and it feels exciting. What did I say at the top of the video? I don't know anything about Chinese mythos. Nothing. Except from what we had with Black Myth Wukong, and I still couldn't summarize the overall mythological aspect of that game and the scope of it to you in a sentence or in a few sentences. I couldn't do it because the scope of it is that large, and more importantly is that foreign to me and to most people in the West who play these games. And then aside from the Black Myth series and aside from Genigods that we have coming up, we also have Blood Message, which is another game that's rooted in Chinese. This game doesn't even seem to be mythology based. It seems like it's based more so on an interpersonal level, where it's just a father and a son dynamic. Not even dynamic, that's their actual relationship, but it's based in Chinese history. So there's just a plethora of information and things that we have yet to even learn about, and games that they could create. The possibilities are endless when it comes to Chinese mythology and culture. And then when it comes to this title, this may become the next major fantasy genre in gaming. Chinese mythology, that could be its whole genre. Now, beyond mythology, Chinese developers have become increasingly influential in the AAA gaming space over the last decade. Studios from China have moved far beyond the mobile gaming reputation that once defined the region internationally. Large budget single-player games from China now regularly compete visually and technically with projects from Japan, Europe, and North America. What makes this trend especially interesting is that Chinese developers frequently build franchises rather than standalone projects. Once a successful universe is established, sequels, spin-offs, films, animation projects, and merchandise often follow. Following the commercial success of Wukong, many analysts believe China could become one of the dominant producers of premium single-player action games over the next decade. So, just based off of that and based on the success that we know that these Chinese games have had and the success that we can foresee for them with games like this, with games like Blood Message, with games like the next Black Myth title in the series, I don't think it's that far-fetched to assume that Genigods could potentially have a sequel or a trilogy or maybe even more games. And just based on the mass and the sheer volume of literature to comb through when it comes to Chinese mythology and history, there are endless titles that they could make. There are endless games that they could make. There are endless movies they could make. And all of this stuff is foreign to us. So you slam on a new title, a new brand, a new narrative, some new characters. You're opening the entire Western hemisphere up to a culture and to a mythology that seems largely familiar to them, but is very unfamiliar to us. And that breeds curiosity, that breeds interest, and that will influence gamer behavior to purchase these titles just out of popular appeal. Now, if people wanting to fit in, or people wanting to try something new, or people wanting to engage and learn more about it, which is the angle that I'm coming at it from. It's more so of a combination of all of those things. So we have Genigods, Nezha. We have Wukong. We could have a game probably about Erlang Shen. We could have a game, well, we are having a game about Zhang Kui. And there are countless others that could lead their own games when it comes to Chinese titles. So China may be building its own mythology-based universe, similar to how we have the Marvel Cinematic Universe or DC, or we have Star Wars, or we have this. They could be making their own thing just simply based off of Chinese mythology games. It could become its own thing. It could be the Souls-like equivalent, but for China. So Genigods Nezha is still years away from release, but first impressions are incredibly strong. Between its large-scale mythology, its impressive visuals, its celestial combat, and the focus on one of China's most iconic heroes, it already stands out among upcoming action RPG games. And I think this game arrives at a moment when global audiences are actively seeking new mythological worlds, new perspectives, new angles of which to play a game, and new cultural identities and ideologies in gaming. If Genigods Lab, if they can deliver on the ambition shown in its reveal trailer, which I foresee they will be able to do so, I think Genigods Nezha could become one of the major next milestones of Chinese AAA titles. Initially, I asked the question, is this the next Black Myth Wukong? This is its own thing. I think they will be able to distinguish themselves. People are, of course, going to draw those similarities and be like, oh, this is produced in China, just like Wukong was produced in China. Oh, this seems kind of similar to it, but I think this will stand out all on its own. And you never know. You also have to ask questions such as, can Chinese studios sort of take over the proverbial crown and proverbial throne when it comes to the new leaders in single action player games throughout the entirety of the games industry across the globe? So I mean, would you rather play Wukong? Would you rather play Nezha? Would you rather play the new Black Myth Zhonghui? Would you rather play this? They just give you these options and they show no indication of slowing down or that they're going to stop anytime soon. So I guess, which mythology deserves a AAA treatment next? For years, gamers have traveled through the worlds of Greek gods, Norse gods, and medieval kingdoms. But with games like Black Myth Wukong and now Genigods Nezha, it feels like we're only just beginning to open the door to one of humanity's oldest and richest mythologies, and we all know nothing about it. And honestly, I don't think we've seen anything yet. I'm Harlem. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.